Welcome to the Fancy Comma LLC YouTube, where we talk about all things science communication, finance, freelancing, and more. Today, I'll be talking about my personal finance journey as a freelance science writer and small business owner. Unlike many people, I didn't graduate from college with a lot of student loan debt. When I graduated from MIT in 2005, I only had $15,000 of student loan debt at a 5% interest rate. Immediately after graduating from college, I landed a job at Massachusetts General Hospital where I worked as a research assistant in a brain imaging lab. I made $30,000 a year, and I had a retirement account where I contributed a small percent of my income, and I also paid my student loans down. I went to Georgetown in Washington, D.C. for graduate school, where I entered a PhD program in neuroscience. The PhD program was fully paid for by my program, but the stipend was actually lower than I had been getting as a research assistant. I only got about $26,000 a year. I didn't have retirement, I wasn't contributing to Social Security, and I had relatively few benefits. Most of my stipend went to rent because DC has a high cost of living. I actually paused my student loan payments during this time because I did not have money as a graduate student. Over the course of my graduate studies, it became clear that I was not cut out for academic science. That's not to say that I didn't have the skills to become an academic scientist, but my projects failed. My first project failed, then I started another project, and by the time 2013 rolled around, I had spent 6 years in pursuit of some projects that, while incredibly interesting, were not happening for me. So, though I was a PhD candidate at the time, I decided to leave graduate school with a master's degree. The day I left graduate school, I signed up for a freelance account on the website Elance, where I started doing freelance writing as a side hustle. In the meantime, I was applying to jobs in the federal government, and I lived off my unemployment checks and the meager earnings I got as a freelancer, sometimes $4 an article. I also went clearance shopping, which in Georgetown was still pretty expensive. Soon, that became incredibly cost prohibitive. By 2014, living in Washington became too expensive on a meager freelance salary, so I moved back to Oklahoma, where I'm from. I lived with my parents for several years while freelancing to pay some bills and generally figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I spent what felt like several months applying to jobs on Capitol Hill, and after endless rejections, I finally got a job in the House of Representatives. So I packed up all of my belongings in a rental car, and I drove to Washington, D.C. to work on Capitol Hill. I lived in a hotel for the first few days of my internship, and I was looking for housing on Craigslist, but I found that I didn't have enough money for the deposit, so I just kept staying in this hotel, and I was so busy with the work I had to do that I just found it easier to live in this hotel and charge it to my credit card. So after about 2.5 months, I actually garnered a $13,000 debt that was entirely credit card debt. After that, I had to start getting really serious about my freelancing efforts. In 2018, I tried to do another internship on the Hill, but it became too expensive. I went there, realized I didn't have the money to do another $13,000 of credit card debt, so had to cut it short. Unfortunately, that cost me another $4,000 on my credit cards. Was it worth it to work on Capitol Hill? Yes. Was it also incredibly expensive and probably cost prohibitive for many? Also, yes. In 2019, I got more serious about freelancing because I had to, because I now had almost $20,000 of debt. This helped me pay off my undergraduate student loans. Oh yeah, I finally did end up moving out of my parents' house, which I never mentioned. And I actually launched Fancy Comma LLC in 2020, and that was another $5,000 to $6,000. So By the time the pandemic started, I was $25,000 in debt. Luckily, the pandemic was a great time to be a science writer, but it was a very bad time to be literally anything else. Or just really, I have no really good memories of the past several years except that I was able to pay down my debts and do a lot of really, really cool projects with a lot of really amazing companies. This is where things started to get incredibly weird. In March 2020, when COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, the stock market crashed. Unfortunately, I had invested about $10,000 to $15,000 in the stock market, which I had planned to withdraw to pay my taxes. But when the markets crashed, that money just completely tanked. So I had to sign up with a payment plan with the IRS for about $17,000. So that was another $17,000 of debt in addition to the $25,000 of purely credit card debt that I had accumulated over the past few years. I prided myself on not getting a PPP loan in all of 2020. But in 2021, I finally had to get a small $2,000 PPP loan, and I also had to withdraw almost $10,000 from my retirement due to all of the problems caused by COVID. Still, I counted myself lucky, as many businesses closed permanently during the pandemic. And I was excited that I could continue doing something I loved as a freelancer. There were tons of bright spots in the pandemic for freelance science writers such as myself. Fancy Comma LLC's science writing services were super needed. I paid off some of my debts. I was even able to buy a car. I've been working steadily over the past few years to reduce my debt, and recently I consolidated some of my credit card debt with a fixed rate interest loan. Fixed rate interest loans can be a good idea when the Federal Reserve increases interest rates. They're especially useful if you have a lot of credit card debt. Right now, the Fed has raised interest rates by, I believe, about 1.5%, and I had about almost $19,000 of credit card debt over two different cards. So each of those cards goes up by 1.5%. So needless to say, that's a lot, especially when you consider the interest rate of the card as well, which is, for my cards, just under 20%. So I Googled around and I found a fixed rate loan to put my credit card debts. Fixed rate loans are great because they move the debt off of your credit card, which can increase your credit score, but they still usually do have some interest rate. But the good news is it's fixed, so even if the Fed raises interest rates again, which they're expected to perhaps do to curb inflation, you won't have to have an increase in your interest rates. So long story short, I was able to do some debt consolidation and think creatively and refinance to reduce the overall amount of interest that I'm paying, because as a freelancer, every dollar that you make counts, and it's a shame to have those dollars just go straight to interest when you could, with a bit of research and smartness, be able to reduce those interest rates and pay less. Currently, I have about $60,000 in debt, including my business debt and my personal debts. A lot of people are trying to go debt-free right now, and I think that's a great idea. But as a small business owner, it's important to know the times that going into debt can actually help you. For example, when the monetary value that you borrow, the dollars you borrow, brings you a greater return on investment than the actual value of the dollars. For example, if you need $100 to do something that will bring you $10,000, that's a really, really good investment. It can also be good when you have personal debt and want to avoid paying your business expenses with your personal funds. Finally, as was the case with Fancy Comma at various points in the pandemic, when you don't have enough cash flow, that is, cash coming into your business, but you do expect to make money a few months from now. For example, if you're experiencing a temporary lull in clients but know that things will improve. Those are cases where I personally believe business debt is a good idea, and that's why I have taken on a little bit of business debt here and there. If you don't stay on top of your business debt, it can become a liability. If you borrow too much and debt gets out of control, or you find that you're spending a lot of money and you're going into debt and you're really not getting a return on that investment, it's time to rethink your strategy. If you have a high interest rate debt, which makes it difficult to pay off, that will become a huge problem for you, especially with the freelance cycle of sometimes making a lot of money and sometimes making not a lot of money. And of course, if you don't make enough money to pay back the loan, then that's going to be really hard for you. So I'm of the school of thought of taking on a little bit of business debt, not too much, but just enough to help you, and cutting costs where it's possible to have sort of like a meager, sort of manageable debt. And whether you love or hate Elon Musk, one of his keys to success for Tesla is managing debts and making sure that debts get paid off. So important visionaries and CEOs know that too much business debt can be toxic to your business, and so I try really hard to not have that much business debt. This is just a quick aside for all my freelance science writers out there. Consider investing in the stock market. Besides helping me build up my savings on accident, because I meant to withdraw the money I invested in the stock market initially to pay my taxes, but now I have a little nest egg, which is not so bad. If you're like me and you love learning about finance, stocks, and economics, you can also use this knowledge that you gain from choosing stocks and making different investments to get some clients in the finance space and write about these different topics in finance. For me, it's a win-win-win. As a freelancer, even though the money can be inconsistent, you can invest in the stock market when you have some money and you will get dividends. The stock market goes up about 7% a year. So it's a really great investment to invest in the stock market. And as I mentioned, I'm a finance nerd, so I regularly invest some of my income in the stock market. Unfortunately, I did have to sell some of my stocks to pay for personal expenses. So I also think of my stocks as my emergency fund. They're not ideal for an emergency fund due to the lack of liquidity when there's a downturn, but since I like to invest in low-risk stocks, it has worked for me. Here are some lessons I've learned trying to manage both my personal and professional finances. You absolutely need to learn how to budget to run a business. If, like me, you're a shopaholic, you will definitely need to come up with creative ways to save money when shopping, managing your spending in those times where you just really need to go to the mall, and coming up with a budget and trying to stick to a budget even if it gets hard, both in your personal life and in your professional life. Second, investing money, even $5 here and there, can help a lot. Over time, it all adds up. Learning about the tax code can help you minimize tax write-offs, but you will still need to figure out ways to cut corners when times are bad. And finally, attitude sets the tone for your investment strategy because our decisions are fueled by emotions. They're not fueled by rationality and logic, as I learned as a graduate student studying financial decision making. An optimistic yet realistic attitude and knowledge of all of the finance tools at your disposal goes a long way. Here are a few things that have helped me pay down my debt: upskilling and raising my rates, saying no to people who ask me to work for lower than my rate, separating my personal and business debt, setting a budget, coming up with a plan to pay down debts, being creative and in a problem-solving mindset, and being in a long-term mindset, because paying down large debts takes forever. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Thanks for watching this video about my financial journey in my personal life and also as a freelance professional with Fancy Comma LLC. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can get notified of Fancy Comma's future posts. Make sure to like this video and chime in with your personal finance journey or challenges you faced along the way. I hope to update our YouTube with more updates as I advance on our debt reduction journey. So Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.